Welcome to Marrow Masters, sponsored by the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link, Seattle Genetics, and our esteemed link partners. The National Bone Marrow Transplant Link, established in 1992, strives to help patients, caregivers, and families cope with the psychosocial challenges of bone marrow stem cell transplant from diagnosis through survivorship. This season will focus on busting marrow myths. There are many myths related to transplant. Am I too old for a transplant? Are clinical trials exploratory and dangerous? My chronic GVHD will never end. Or will it? Does palliative care mean hospice? Is our love enough to get us through this cancer? No match in my family. Am I out of options? And timely info on CAR T cellular therapy as it relates to transplant as another option. Today's episode will focus on clinical trials. Some say they are dangerous and exploratory. Get ready to be educated, enlightened, and empowered. And now your host, the Executive Director of the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link, Peggy Burkhardt.
Welcome. It's time to bust another myth. Today I'm joined by our staff social worker, Jennifer Gillette, who comes to us with over 20 years of oncology experience within the Ascension Health System. She is here today to help us explore the myth of whether or not our love is enough to overcome issues on a transplant cancer journey. So Jen, what do you think of this myth?
Well, Peggy, I think it is truly busted. Even if you don't put cancer into it, half of the marriage, regardless of cancer, end in divorce. And didn't these couples once love each other? I also think it's really important that we define what love is. And everybody might have their own variation of what they view love to be. But if it's just feelings of happiness for each other, feelings are like waves. They can come and go. And so that's not a very solid foundation for love. So therefore, love in the feeling sense isn't enough. But if we have actions and decisions involved with that, as well as character traits such as patience, faithfulness, then we're getting to a more realistic definition of love, in my opinion. As a counselor, I've always told my patients that love, trust, respect, communication, fun, and a sense of spirituality woven through there are the foundation blocks for a healthy marriage. And you need to look at it like the spokes on a wheel. If one spoke is off, if it's halfway down, you're going to be riding that bike really wobbly. And so it's really important that if there is an area in that, and I'll repeat them again just so you can hear them more slowly, the love, trust, respect, communication, and fun, and then spirituality woven throughout. If something's off there, that you take the time to fix that and things will go much smoother. So Peg, love is awesome, but I think we need to be mindful that a marriage needs more than a feeling or liking of each other, because that just doesn't happen every moment of the day.
I totally agree. So let's say a couple has a great working definition of love. Is that alone enough?
Well, research tells us that there are certain markers or tasks that seem to indicate strength in a marriage. To explore how the stress of cancer can create this wedge, I wanted to go over some of those tasks that are brought up in the Good Marriage, How and Why Love Lasts book, written by Judith Wallerstein. She talks about 9 psychological tasks that are really important to have a strong foundation within a marriage. One of the tasks, she notes, is to being able to separate appropriately from your family of origin and to give your marriage to the highest ranking and priority. So imagine on a cancer journey if someone has not met that task. Maybe you have a mother that's trying to rule everything on the cancer unit and the spouse becomes resentful. Or maybe there's overstepping of boundaries when the spouse is trying to care like they're not doing good enough. So those can bring up issues. Another task that she talks about with this research is building a sense of identity as we based on intimacy, respect, and trust, while balancing this with the needs of boundaries of still being an individual. So has that couple learned to have a mindset that does anything to keep the relationship strong while doing the best they can to meet the needs of the individual? Does the partner that is caregiving already feel like they have not gotten their needs met, and so cancer just magnifies the issue? If you think about different beginnings in a relationship, it's really important to learn how to come together and see the we and not just the me. Another task that has been brought up is to establish a healthy sexual relationship that is protected to the best of one's ability from work and family obligations. Health issues certainly can affect people's sexuality. It can affect their sex drive. It can be affected too by low blood counts, pain, energy levels, skin irritation or excessive dryness, hormone shifts, or being able to have a full erection or climax. It's important that you ask your healthcare team to help you overcome these hurdles, even though it can be an awkward topic for some people. It's really important that you learn to be open about it because it's something that has meaning to you in your relationship. It's also really important that the couple has good communication. The partner that has the sensitivity needs to communicate what they're ready for and what they're wanting to do. And each partner needs to be understanding of what the other needs and look at sexuality from an expanded view. They can try other ways to show intimacy or to find maybe positions and things that are more comfortable. They can also try to talk to other people on the healthcare team that could give them different tips and things as well. Another task is transitioning to parenthood, embracing the magnificent role of parenting while continuing to protect the needs of the couple.
Jen, that must be tough to balance when one is sick.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think it's so hard when someone has cancer. Their energy is so limited. And you might find that the needs of your child might be more prevalent than maybe your spouse. You feel like your spouse is old enough to take care of himself, but then you see your child being helpless in this situation. But it's important to remember that your spouse has needs too. And even simple things like a thank you or I love you can go a really long way. Another task is how you cope with crisis as a couple and master the need to balance the needs of we and I during the crisis. Have we learned a balance of selflessness while still making sure we take care of ourselves? For example, caregivers can become really burned out, and that can create a wedge between them and their partner if they're not taking care of themselves. And the patient might feel that their spouse isn't there for them, but maybe their spouse hasn't really learned how to be there in a way that's relevant to them. So those are things that are important to learn how to navigate the crisis. The sixth task that is discussed is how you handle adversity. Is it safe to express differences, anger, and conflict? Can I be respected and trust you fully with my vulnerability? And do we have a history where we compromise, knowing when to give and take, and respecting the needs and wishes of our partner? I personally, in my own relationship, try to say yes as often as possible. And just a silly little example, but my husband inherited his father's fly fishing cabinet when his father passed. And he didn't want it in the basement and didn't want it to warp. I can't say that I was overly excited about it being in the middle of my living room, but at the end of the day, it's important that my partner's needs are met, and his needs are more important than my decorating, which isn't the best anyway. So anyway, that leads us to the next task, which is learning to use humor and putting things in perspective and avoiding boredom and isolation. Do you help each other to be positive together through all the ups and downs of cancer? If I'm an anxious or angry person, does that create an environment for my spouse that's draining? Can we support each other through the lows, but look for the things to be grateful for to make each day better? I think to someone who had done this so wonderfully with her husband on a transplant journey, Marcella, who talked about the ways that they tried to stay close and just to be supportive. They talked about Skyping all night when they were separated. She talked about Taco Tuesdays and journaling together, and they just gave each other things to look forward to. They just did a great job as a couple trying to be positive and have humor and be encouraging. And then another task is, have you learned to nurture and comfort each other in ways that are meaningful? Do you encourage and support and help when your partner is in need?
What are some of the ways, Jen, that you recommend that people learn what has meaning to their spouse?
Well, certainly, I think, communicating with your spouse and trying to find ways that you can be very clear and concise and help each other to understand. But a lot of people have heard about this with the love languages and understanding what that language is to your spouse. The love languages, some people really appreciate gifts, and some people really appreciate and feel loved by physical affection or there's words of affirmation, there's quality time, and there's acts of service. So if I'm showing love to my spouse in a way that has meaning to me, but not maybe them as much, I'm not meeting their needs. So it's important to figure out, like even within my own children, my daughter really loves quality time. So if I just bought her a bunch of gifts, she's not going to feel that her mom loves her. Whereas one of my sons really likes acts of service. So he might not want a bunch of hugs from his mom, but breakfast in bed will certainly do it. So it's really just learning how to tune in and figure out how the people in your life feel loved and trying to be meaningful. And then the final task, the ninth one, is have you held on to those images of love while accepting the evolution of them in your relationship? You might not act like honeymooners anymore, and there can be many hurdles, but do I consciously choose to make the most of each stage of my relationship? Think about how a child develops. Everything has pluses and some challenges. You know, when a baby's first born, they're as cute as a button. You can't snuggle them enough. But then it's a little challenging not to sleep at night. And each of the stages of your relationship will probably go through those kinds of things too. There's good things about that, and there might be challenging things. If you're a couple that's older, you know, you might not be going out and having as much fun, and you might have more stress in life. But are you at a point in your relationship where you've developed a deeper bond that's based on a strong foundation? And so it's looking on how to just really accept that evolution and be just walking in gratitude with that relationship.
Wow, people really can get stuck. How do we help avoid these wedges?
Well, I think awareness is really a large part of it. Certainly, you know, communicating with each other is very important, but being aware that there's tasks, being aware that there's different love languages, and knowing when to ask for help. Because seeing a counselor or talking to your healthcare team about some of these issues can certainly help. And it's important to find ways to strengthen your relationship, just like you're trying to restore your body after treatment. You need to strategize how to be strong with each of these tasks. And if there's an area of weakness, how can you strengthen it to better support each other? As well as you also have to figure out how to nurture each other through this process.
Thanks, Jen. Let's talk about some of the other challenges people need to be aware of.
Absolutely. Well, especially in the cancer journey, it's important for us to realize that there is an added stress of the role changes, the intense life-altering transitions, and all kinds of aspects of their life, financial strains, the list could go on. During diagnosis and treatment, one might experience multiple stressors and have to make constant life-changing decisions quickly, which can just really, again, magnify those cracks in the relationship. And then there's the transition from the partner going to a caretaker and the other partner becoming a patient. That can be a huge strain. And then there's the transitioning back after you've maybe mastered that and made an art of that transition. You have to figure out how to bounce back. And you might not always know how to do that. Some people have not felt equipped to be caretakers. Some people resent taking over the duties of their spouse, or feel that they start disconnecting out of fear of losing them. Some have a hard time reconnecting after there's a new norm. They feel like they're with someone who's different than they were before. Some might find that that person just doesn't seem to appreciate them or doesn't honor the sacrifices they've made. There's also people who have felt abandoned as their spouse did not step up to the plate in their time of need. So there's a lot of issues that, you know, it could be based on perceptions. It's not always based on reality, but there's a lot of areas here for people to get stuck. And so again, don't think that it's a matter of love being the only thing. There's a lot of places for people to get stuck. So going through a transplant journey just amplifies cracks, and how we deal with these cracks can either draw people closer than they have ever been, or they can be the final blow to a relationship. Seeing a counselor can help you transition through these areas more smoothly, since they are aware of the common pitfalls and can help you develop the most constructive way to handle those conversations.
So, Jen, we see that there are many ways to have stress during this journey. We know of many couples that call into the link and have reported to us that their relationship grew even stronger after the experience, in fact. What do some of these couples recommend that have helped them to successfully overcome the stresses and obstacles?
Well, I have heard many great ones since I've been here and at my time at the hospital. One of them is to find ways to meaningfully cheer each other on. If you don't know what that looks like, ask them what support and encouragement looks like. And again, I think back to Marcella, just how precious her and John's story is, and that they really were aware of what lifted each other up. Another tip is to be aware of each other's needs and protect each other's boundaries. For example, if you know that your spouse is having a rough day, limit the calls they receive or visits if it's too much. Another thing we hear over and over again is ask for outside help. Caregivers, I want you to hear this. You simply cannot do it all. You need a support system too. I remember one of the first speakers we ever had on our Lunch and Learns, Kate, and how she was just by her husband's side every step of the way. Part of the way she did that is she needed someone to step in and help her with the kids so that she could focus on everything that was happening with him. But caregivers, you need caregivers. Another tip is everyone needs a break in self-care. And remember that it's okay to have breakdowns. Everybody says, be positive, be positive. And be positive is a great thing. But it's also okay to have moments where you just let it go because it's hard. This is not easy. I know one of the people that had shared that with us, Tracy Jolly, another person from our Lunch and Learns, talked about how she just needed to let herself have that time. She also recommended that tapping and some of those other tools were helpful. So if there's things like massage or yoga or something like that, that is a calming strategy to you, I encourage you to use it.
Meditation, too.
Oh, absolutely. Meditation is something that can really help people. Another tip is to find new ways to connect, new projects, new interests, or simply being creative with that in which you have already done. We love to talk about that story with the couple with the pie and the gentleman who used to make the pies on his own before the transplant and how much joy that brought him. But then after the transplant, he didn't have the energy to do all that was needed on his own. And so his wife would finish the pieces that he couldn't do, and it became a new and beautiful shared task that they did together.
That is one of our favorite stories around here.
We love the pie story. Another tip is to be patient because this takes at least a year to find out what your new norm is after a transplant. So do not expect that you are going to know everything on how your body's going to do right away. Another tip is both partners need to learn how to effectively manage and express their feelings. Healthy marriages will still feel stress in this time. It's best to air deepest feelings early on and to communicate often. Running from those feelings or just putting them off can just put a wedge between the two of you. So learning how to communicate early is just one of the greatest recommendations. Each spouse must learn how to deal and respond to stress in a life-building way. They just find ways that are healthy to cope, whether it be exercise or we were talking about meditation, and that they're building each other up instead of taking that stress out on each other. Flexible thinking is also needed when adjusting to new anything. Look for what opportunities there are while allowing yourself to grieve the losses and seeking creative solutions. Another one of our favorite stories around here is the golf story of our little buddy who really enjoyed golf before his transplant and after, again, didn't quite have the energy to do it the way he used to, but then he worked in the pro shop and at least got to hang out and talk golf and do his thing. So he didn't just totally surrender those parts of himself that he enjoyed so much.
That is definitely a creative solution.
Yes. We have learned from the best here. Another person I think of here is Rhonda and challenging thoughts. A very powerful statement we were told in one of our Lunch and Learns is to remember that you are a blessing and not a burden. When we have those negative thoughts, it can just bring you down. It can bring you and your partner down. And it can create wedges because your partner is very happy to be working with you most of the time to try to get you both to a better spot. And so not to be caught up in negativity about yourself and your situation. It's also important to practice gratitude. And I think this is one for whether you have cancer or not. Every day we can choose to wake up and look at how incredibly blessed we are, all the wonderful things around us, or we can focus on the things that aren't what we want them to be. But when you do that, you're ignoring the many wonderful people in your life, your circumstances of support. So it's really important that you take stock in that. Having realistic expectations is important, with each other. Again, realizing even if we love each other, it doesn't mean we're not going to get on each other's nerves. That is just going to happen. There's going to be days. Mama said there'd be days like this. And then what can I do to make me and we stronger every day? Be mindful of your focus and choose to author how your story goes instead of letting your story happen to you. Rhonda was another person who gave us this great tip too. She had given the example of being in a hospital bed and that she was trying to push herself to be physically stronger each day. And when she noticed that sitting in a chair made her feel just a little less like a patient, she would try to increase her time in the chair each day. And so in your relationship, how can you use that concept? How can you improve your communication just a little bit more each day? How can you show that love just a little more meaningfully each day? How can you be a little more nurturing, a little more forgiving? All those kinds of things. If you just try to be a little more each day, you can make gains. And then it's important that you heal as a team and always have hope. That's a we experience. It's not an I, it's a we. So having a counselor to help you to develop in these areas will only help you reach your goals sooner and more efficiently. However, I also have a couple ideas on resources you can explore that could be helpful. There's a book called Own Your Cancer, a Take Charge Guide for Recently Diagnosed and Those Who Love Them by Dr. Edelstein. There's a book by Terrence Real, The New Rules of Marriage. Also, there's communication tools that can be found on Be the Match, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, Survivor Network, and Cancer Care. In regards to sexuality issues, in addition to your healthcare team, you can go on BMT InfoNet or Livestrong and find some great resources. And I would also recommend you read some of our blogs, especially our February 2019 Lunch and Learn with the link on caregiving. There's some great couple tips in there. And remember that love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Let your journey be one that draws you closer. We wish you all the best and encourage you to reach out to us if you could use more support.
Thanks, Jen. It was a great presentation, and I think it really cleared up some of the thoughts on will our love be enough? Thanks for helping us bust another myth.
Thank you, Peggy. Happy to.
This has been the Marrow Masters podcast. Feel free to share this episode via social media, text, or email. To hear more, subscribe for free to Marrow Masters in your favorite podcast app. To learn more about the resources available to patients and caregivers, check out the National Bone Marrow Transplant link at nbmtlink.org. That's nbmtlink.org, or just tap the link below in the show notes.